One of my favorite quotes comes from Mark Twain, and he says, there's three types of lies in this world. There's lies, there's damn lies, and then there's statistics. Actually, I don't think the statistics are necessarily lies. They're just your interpretation of the statistics.
Hello, everyone. This is Rigas again from the Practice Research Agency, where every day, believe it or not, we're questioning what we're doing, and we're always trying to figure out what it is that we're actually doing in order that we can create methodologies, create better practices to create better insights and better outcomes. And in that vein, today I wanted to touch on a research topic that is absolutely and terribly boring because it has to do with patterns and statistics and significance and hypotheses and null hypotheses. So I'm pretty sure those four things will make most people switch off. And when I say most people, I'm referring to very few people. I'm referring to the very few people who watch this sort of stuff. Those four words will probably make them switch off, but they are actually very interesting concepts and very interesting words because it is really all about the philosophy of market research, and particularly the philosophy of quantitative market research. Let's just leave qualitative aside for a second because that tends to deal with a lot of other different types of things. But let's look at quantitative research now, and let's look at what we're doing when we're actually measuring stuff in quantitative research. Whether we like it or not, whether we know we're doing this or not, this is in fact what we're actually doing. And the first thing that I want to talk about is actually significance. And usually we show a result to our clients and they will rightfully ask, is this difference between men and women and younger and older consumers or users and non-users of these brands, whatever subgroups, are these differences that you're showing us, are they significant? And they're right to ask that question because the reality is a statistically significant difference is going to give us a lot more confidence, but significance is not often what it seems to be. And I'm going to say that it's actually not even really crucial for marketing decisions, significance. And I'll show you why in this excellent example that we've got here. And the reason I say that is because we don't actually need statistical significance in order to determine a pattern and to also have reasonable amount of confidence in that pattern, even though it's not statistically significant. And because often the reason things are not statistically significant is because there isn't enough sample behind the pattern in order for the mathematics, if you like, to provide us with a confident result, if you like. So and we're often using statistics as this sort of crutch. And we often use these significance tests as a bit of a crutch to see whether we should really be taking notice of something or not. But I'm going to posit that we should really be taking notice of things way before they may or may not become statistically significant. And this is the other thing. There's another effect of adding a lot more sample as well, because it doesn't always result to statistical significance, but we will come to that as we go through this particular result. Now, the example I'm going to show you today is, as always in these videos, I do not make up data. I have opinions, but I don't make up data. The data I show you is real data collected from real respondents, but as usual, I'm not going to tell you what it's for at all. I can say it's in packaged goods because that's broad enough to not give away anything at all. We are within some tracking studies that we're running, we're able to accommodate what we call ad hoc questions because of our qualitative system and the use of AI, which I'm not going to go into today, but it allows us to have ad hoc questions. And we have been in a very interesting position whereby we were given a concept to test in one of our tracking waves. And of course, we dutifully created questions and sent those questions out to our tracking sample, and they dutifully responded. 100 people, right? 100 people came in with the initial response, and I'm going to show you those results. But then we were in the position where this ad hoc question on this concept remained in our tracker for the next 2 waves. And so in the next wave, we received another 150 responses. And in the subsequent wave, because of all kinds of boosting that we had to do for other reasons, we doubled the sample and ended up with 500 responses. So we've got a situation where we've got exactly the same question about exactly the same concept being fielded progressively and being analyzed and presented progressively as well. And some very interesting things happen in terms of patterns, in terms of significance, in terms of all kinds of things. And the data I'm going to show you refers to, let's call it just a very typical purchase intention question based upon a very raw concept and product. So let's start with the first wave with the first 100 people, and I'll just bring up the chart as well. So let's look at the first 100 respondents and what, in fact, they're already telling us about the concept. Firstly, we can see that there is already some significance, even within the first 100, but which is really the purchase intention between males and females at the definite level, at the definitely will level. And you can see here we're talking about an extremely different set of responses between men and women in this survey for this question, and really 26% to 2%. Now, automatically, this creates suspicion. This creates suspicion, not the pattern so much, not the pattern that women might like this. At least the intention might be that women might have a higher intention to buy this product than men. But this level of extremity in terms of that response is suggestive of a low sample, of course. But the package, the p-test, the t-test, whatever they're using, is giving us a significant result on this, even though it is only 100 people. The difference is so extreme that they're putting a significance on it. Now, this is an example where you're being shown that something is significant, and it may very well be, but it really is, because of it's 100 people, and it's basically 50 men and 50 women. So then by the time you split it up into the responses on a 5-point scale, you're not talking about many people at all. And in that situation, the significance that they're giving us is true, but it's also based upon an extreme response that we're deeply suspicious of because of the low sample. However, that's not the only pattern, and that's the only significance, but that's not the only pattern we're detecting. The other pattern we're detecting, of course, is that the middle-aged group, the 35 to 55-year-olds, might have a bit more of a definite intention, although that could be sampling as well. And then there is the oldest age group, the over 55s, saying a much bigger percentage, 10% of them saying, 19% of them saying that they definitely will not be buying this product, or at least that is their intention. So we've got both patterns and significance, but what I want to do now is look at what adding another, in this case, another more than 150 people to the sample does to the results, because we reported it again. And again, if I could put this up. Now you can see a bunch of things have happened here. Firstly, the difference between men and women is there's still a pattern toward, there is what we call the female skew toward the product. That's typically the language that we're using in market research, a female skew, a male skew, a younger, older skew. There is a skew, but it is no longer that strong. Still getting 12% of men who are saying they'll definitely be buying, or at least considering buying this product if they see it. So that looks much more sober. That's actually, even though it's not significantly different, that is a pattern that is probably more real than what we saw previously, which was significantly different. It's more sober, it is less significant, but it is probably more a realistic pattern of what we should be hanging our hats on in terms of marketing, going forward with marketing this product perhaps. And we can see that again, that middle-aged group, that remains in terms of, at least in terms of that top box, as a skew there as well. So there is something about the product that is appealing to those particular age groups. And again, this time, because we've added sample, the 18% of over 55s who are saying they will definitely not buy the product, this time that is significant. Now, it was a pattern before, but it's significant now, only because we've added sample. So a couple of things have happened when we added sample. The older pattern became significant. The pattern between males and females lost its significance, but became more of a pattern. But that doesn't mean it's less valid. This is what I'm trying to say. In fact, this non-significant result between men and women is probably more valid than the significant result we saw based upon 100 people. Let's see what happens now when we double the sample. We add another 250 people, and what can we see here? Okay, so some things have persisted. Some things have persisted. So the pattern between males and females has now persisted. We've doubled the sample, but even though it's not significant, the fact that pattern has persisted to this extent, even when we've doubled the sample, is indicating to me that is a pattern we need to be aware of. But look at what's happened to the age cohorts here. What's happened, you've seen a great normalization across the ages when we've doubled the sample, when we've added the sample, when we got to 500. We've seen more normalization of the data, less extreme responses. And I'll come to the implications of this in a minute. So what we're seeing here is that middle age skew. That's not really long. That's no longer there. That is now now starts from a younger age group and goes all the way up to 54. So that's very similar there. The older age group, the over 55s, still the same percentage of them are still saying they're not buying the product, about 20%, but it's no longer significantly different to the other two. Can you see what's happened to the other age groups? This is interesting because we've lost every significant detail that we had previously. What would happen if we added, and I can't show you this because we didn't, but what would happen if we added another 500 people, another 1,000? What would happen if we added another 10,000 consumers to this sample? Does that mean that this graph would then start to look completely normalized, almost completely normalized, in the sense that there's going to be hardly any difference between men and women or between the different age groups? Or, there might be like 2% difference or 3% difference on the different scores, in which case they're definitely no longer significant, and even then struggling to see a pattern. Now, and does that actually support the Ehrenberg-Bass theory? I'm not sure this is their theory, actually, but no, this is their theory. Their theory is that there is hardly any demographic or age or age difference in people's purchasing habits of everyday, fast-moving consumer goods, unless you're buying baby food because you got a baby, all right? So 50-year-olds with teenage children don't buy baby food, okay? Obvious things like that happen. But as far as the rest goes, in terms of who's buying these soft drinks and who's buying these energy drinks and who's buying these chocolate bars and who's buying these this and that and the other, all these everyday items, who's buying rice, who's buying flour, that there isn't any across the entire population, that there isn't much discrimination amongst the age groups. So, which is why a company like Mars, for example, when people ask them, who's your target group, they say everyone with a mouth, right? Because they subscribe to this theory that in their categories, there is no real difference between the demographics, and they're actually targeting everyone who can eat, which is a very interesting targeting mechanism, isn't it? Because you're not targeting. You're basically saying, I'm for everybody. And is that what this data is actually approaching, even though we don't have enough data for that? They use home scan data, big data sets with many years of data, I think, to come to a lot of these conclusions in their book. I think they do. But is what we've got here, this little microcosm, a little simulation of what happens when you add a lot of data to something like this. Initially, you come off thinking, oh, this is a bit more of a middle-aged female product, and it's definitely not for the oldies, including myself in that age group. Definitely not for the oldies. But really, we might be wrong. We might be very wrong. But by the time you add 10,000 cases to this, that these differences are going to be negligible, if they're at all. So this is super interesting, really, isn't it? You'd think that when we've got a pattern, and when you add sample to that pattern, then that pattern will become significant. And we saw that, didn't we? We saw that when we went from 100 to 250 people. But then when we doubled the sample again, that went away. I found that absolutely fascinating, going through that process and the implications of that. I think we always need to keep this in mind and try and understand what might happen when we extrapolate our 300 people into an actual market of millions of consumers, what might happen there. And I'm going to end this point with one thing that was said to me by someone. We're talking about elections and compulsory elections and whatnot. And he said something that was extremely interesting, I thought. He said, if you want a less extreme government in power, of either persuasion, left or right or either way, right? If you want a less extreme government in power, then you must institute compulsory voting, right? When you have non-compulsory voting, you get more extreme responses in the votes, just like we do when we have a smaller sample. If you have compulsory voting and bring everyone to the ballot box, that means that the vote gets normalized. There's more of a middle ground. Therefore, the parties must keep more of a middle ground, lest they alienate. Now, we know there are exceptions because it's politics and anything can happen in politics, but that is the sampling philosophy as is applied to something like voting. Compulsory voting means that we get a more normalized set of governments from either side because that's what they need to conform to. Because when everybody votes, we become less extreme as a society. We become more normalized, which I find extremely interesting and an extremely interesting implication of something like statistical data, which is terribly boring, like I said. We're going to come now to the second point of this video, because this is about something even more boring and philosophical, because it's about hypotheses and null hypotheses. And this is really about, let's use the same example, right? We've got this concept and we're testing this concept, right? So therefore, when a client gives us a concept to test, that means their hypothesis is that this concept is going to make a difference. It will do something, it'll sell, right? It's going to make a difference. That's their hypothesis. And they want us to go off and research that hypothesis. And of course, we dutifully go off and come back to them and say, yeah, we've got statistical significance that at the 95% level, we're confident that this product will make a difference. We'll do X, Y, Z, right? But in fact, if technically that's not what we're doing as researchers, whether we like it or not, we're not testing that. When we're doing quant research and using stats, we're not really testing the hypothesis. We are not testing whether this product will make a difference. What we're actually doing, if anyone studied research, you will recall something called hypotheses and null hypotheses. It's only very recently that I've even understood what any of this stuff meant, which is why I'm relaying it right now. What we're really doing is we're testing the null hypothesis. What is the null hypothesis? We're testing the null hypothesis. So here we go. The hypothesis is called H1 is the hypothesis. This product will make a difference. When the client asks us to go off and tell them whether this might be the case or not, what we're really doing is we are creating a null hypothesis H0, which says this product will not make a difference. That's the nullification of the hypothesis. Believe it or not, that's what we're testing. We're testing whether we can prove or disprove that this product will not make a difference. I'll say that again. We are testing the null hypothesis, which means that we are proving or disproving whether the null hypothesis is true. Which means that if we find a difference, let's say, we think there is a significant likelihood that this product, what we're really saying to them is that we've got enough evidence here to reject the null hypothesis. We've got enough evidence to say to you that the null hypothesis that this product will not make a difference is not true. That's what we're saying. That is a successful result. Now, let's note what we're not telling the client. We are not telling the client that this product will make a difference because we don't know that. We haven't tested that, believe it or not. We've tested only the null hypothesis, and we can say that we have enough evidence to indicate or to reject the null hypothesis that this product will not make a difference. However, that doesn't mean that this product will make a difference. We haven't actually tested that. And I know a lot of people are going to be like, what the hell? Isn't this just a stupid semantic philosophical game? Isn't that all it is? Aren't we? Look, what's the difference? Aren't we just really saying that, yeah, this product will make a difference? But we're not. That's what I'm trying to say. We're not saying that. We think we're saying that, but we're not actually saying that. Because use another analogy. This analogy is apparently used quite a bit to explain this. So the prosecution is saying it has charged the defendant, and the hypothesis is the defendant is guilty, and it is so what they're actually doing is that they're not proving that person is guilty. What they need to do is disprove that the null hypothesis that the person is innocent is not true. What they need to do is prove that the defendant, they need to prove the null hypothesis that they are innocent is false, because they can't really say or prove that he did it. Especially the person is claiming innocence, right? The defendant is claiming innocence. They're taking the null hypothesis. It is up to the prosecution to disprove the null hypothesis because they can't really prove that he did it. That is the best analogy. Prosecution says hypothesis, you are guilty. Null hypothesis, I'm innocent. The prosecution must disprove the null hypothesis. I guess that's what guilty beyond reasonable doubt means, I think. I don't know. It's tricky. Like I said, it's tricky. I'm not sure I fully understand the whole thing myself or whether everything that I've said is 100% correct because it is very tricky and very semantic. But I just thought it was a very interesting thing after all these years in terms of testing concepts. And this is what we always do, right? Test this, that, and the other and look for significance. I just thought it was very interesting that none of us are ever really saying to the client that something will make a difference, but rather disproving or proving that it won't make a difference. I think I will leave it at that today. If you've listened so far to this one, then okay, thank you very much. You might share the same passion or interest that I have, and I thank you for that. And otherwise, I will be speaking again soon. Goodbye for now. Bye-bye.
Actually, I don't think the statistics are necessarily lies. They're just your interpretation of the statistics.